Hi, welcome to another episode of the Chief of Staff Show. I'm so honored to be joined today by Hallie Warner. She is one of, in my opinions, like the OGs of the profession. So, Hallie, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you so much for having me.
I always start off these conversations by asking about people's origin stories. How did you get into the Chief of Staff role?
Yeah, so I was working with a serial entrepreneur in like 2010 as his executive assistant, and he was, starting multiple organizations. We started expanding from just one state across multiple states and adding new entities and new businesses. And as the work started to evolve and I started to grow in my role as an executive assistant, I started thinking about what was next. And I loved the EA profession. I saw it as a career path in and of itself. And I also couldn't help but start exploring other opportunities. So I went down a really deep discovery path of because I was doing a little bit of operations in that role as well. So I was seeing operations, I was seeing marketing, I was seeing a lot of executive support in my EA role. Again, I was working for a founder and entrepreneur, so I had my hands in a lot of things. And so I really started doing a very deep dive into the COO role and then the chief of staff role. And it was like 2013. There was not a ton of information out there at the time about what a corporate chief of staff looked like. So most of my research entailed reading white papers from White House chief of staff. I think I was like researching their actual job descriptions, like on the government's like website, and doing like a dive down there. And then I did the deep dive down into what a chief of staff, a chief operating officer role looked like. And I very quickly discovered, okay, COO is not really the path I want to go down. I love working in lockstep with a leader and I like being their strategic partner. And so for me, it was kind of a natural extension from going from EA to chief of staff, particularly because I found out I was doing a lot of the work already. Again, because I had my hands in so many things, the company was growing. I just got to be doing a lot of different things. So in 2013, I officially proposed the role to my executive of chief of staff. At that point, he agreed. I hired my replacement. So we hired an executive assistant so that I could move into the chief of staff role. And I did that for about 10 years.
Wow. Okay. You hit on so many great things there. One, I think it's really important. I'm also someone who came from an EA background and became a chief of staff, and
Yeah.
that works for a lot of people. It doesn't work for a lot of people. There's a lot of nuance there. It's not one size fits all, like we'd mentioned earlier. But I have found that especially EAs that are working for CEOs, especially founder CEOs, entrepreneurial CEOs, they're really getting their hands on a lot of different things. Just the nature of like the situation. Like there's not often with a founder, there's not a huge team, there's not huge departments that can, hand off and delegate to. So you as the EA are doing a lot of this work and in turn doing a lot of chief of staff work. So
Yeah.
that was really interesting that you mentioned that.
Yeah. Yeah. And then when it became too much for one person, I felt like that I had that choice point, right? I could have decided that the EA role was absolutely the role I loved. That would have been totally fine. The company still needed to make another hire because we were just growing. And so I just was, I had the privilege of being able to decide what role I kind of saw myself in next. But to your point, I was already doing so many things because of the nature of working for a founder. And it just so happened that my path was the chief of staff path.
Yeah. And it's another really like important thing for people who are EAs considering becoming a chief of staff, especially in your current organization, which I think is like the strongest, smoothest entryway. Make sure you backfill. You mentioned
Yeah.
that you did find your replacement. So yeah, tell me about your thoughts around that.
Yeah, I could not agree more. I have, and I'm sure you've seen this too, where whether it's an EA or anyone else moving into a chief of staff position, one of my first questions is, do you have an EA? Is there an EA on the team? Or in the executive office? Sometimes it's yes, and I'm like, okay, great, we're off to a good start. And when it's a no, I say, okay, well then who's responsible for those responsibilities? Who's in charge of handling the EA response? And of course, as you can imagine, it ends up often being the chief of staff. And I always say it's possible to do it for a little bit of time, but what ends up happening is because of the nature of the EA role, it's very driven by the demands of the day. Those things are often more urgent. Some, chief of staff sometimes is a little bit more future focused, and you're like working on long-term strategy or comms plans or launching a new initiative. By just the construct of it, you end up having to do the EA stuff first, and sometimes that ends up taking over the role. So I think it can be done listen, I did both for a while, like when we had an EA leave and we were waiting to replace. Sure. Can it be done? Yes. But for how long? And are you really able to scale? And is it sustainable long term?
Yeah, and 100%. I tell people that too. I'm like, if you're a chief of staff and you don't have, if your team doesn't have an EA, then you are the EA. So are
Yeah.
you good with that? Like, what's the plan for that? But like, let's just be clear, like you'll be doing it. So yeah, that's always an interesting thing. But we jumped right into your story and I love hearing about it, but I want to share why I originally said like you are the OG in this because like you mentioned, there's not a lot of literature, there weren't a lot of things. I also got into this profession over 15 years ago and I think I found like a Medium blog post or something.
Yes.
And so a lot of us early on had to just build things as we were going. But you
Mhm.
actually wrote what I consider to be one of the best books about the topic, which is The Founder and the Force Multiplier. So I would love to just hear like how did that book come into existence? I know you were doing the work. Can you tell me that story?
Yeah. We wrote the book in my executive that I was working with, and I wrote the book in 2019. We had been writing a blog, a weekly blog for quite some time on the topic of the founder and the force multiplier. And again, because I worked with the founder, like in the beginning, it was a lot of EA related topics, but over time it started transitioning into a lot more chief of staff topics. It's like, who's the right hand partner? In some companies, who is the force multiplier for a founder or a leader? In some organizations, it's an EA and they may never hire a chief of staff. And in some organizations, it's a chief of staff. In some organizations, it's EA chief of staff PA. So for me, like the force multiplier role is whoever these right hand partners are to the principal. So, and while again, the book maybe leaned a little bit more towards EA, again, from my experience, I was already doing so much of the chief of staff work. I think that's why it translates to a lot of either early chiefs of staff, associate chiefs of staff, or chiefs of staff to founders, because it's kind of a bit of a hybrid. But because we were writing the blog, we had said, I think we want to write a book. And so we were going over what topics do we want to write a book about. And anytime we wrote anything and posted anything about the EA or the chief of staff topic, that always got the most traffic and the most comments. And so we said, I think there's something there. I think that's where the book is. We could we could talk about leadership. We could talk about personal growth. But at the heart of it, this was what people were kind of already asking for and already interested in. So we just took that knowledge and translated into our first book.
Yeah, I love that. For those who aren't yet familiar with the book, what would you say is like the biggest takeaway or the biggest like nugget in there that you'd like to share?
Yeah, I think kind of at the heart of it is that a partnership is about partnership, and that partnership is a choice. And you really need the leader to understand what having a right hand partner looks like. And I actually have so many founders read the book and then they hand it off to
Mhm.
their right hand partner, and that's the beautiful thing to me, is when they're both reading it together. And then similarly, having the EA or the whoever the right hand partner is, a PA or chief of staff, saying, yeah, I also want to be in partnership. I'm not looking. This is not a job for me. I'm investing my time, my energy, my knowledge, my ability to grow, my desire to grow in the role, to grow as a leader, into this partnership, to be a strategic support and strategic thought partner to this executive. But again, for me, it's like, it's really about the power of the partnership, and that is a choice. And not every leader wants that level of force multiplier on their team. And sometimes the employee, the team member, needs to acknowledge that no matter what they do, if the leader is not interested in having a true partnership and they just want somebody to give tasks to, they're probably ultimately, neither one is going to actually get what they want and be successful long term.
Yeah. And that's so important. Like understanding when you're in the seat, understanding how to manage up, understanding how to navigate that partnership dynamic. Because you're right, a lot of times, and it's not necessarily a statement about your like capabilities. It's more like sometimes the leader is unable to delegate. Sometimes they're holding on too tightly out of like insecurity, all of these different things that could be going on. So I'm kind
Mhm.
of loving the idea of like, gifting this book for Boss's Day or something. I'm
Yeah.
like, here's how it should work.
Yeah. Like, here, why don't you read this book and let's talk about it?
Yeah, because there's a lot of misconceptions around the partnership piece in general. But what would you say, just having been so long in this like force multiplier role, what would you say are some of the biggest misconceptions that you see?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like the typical one is like, EAs and chiefs of staff are just interchangeable positions. And as we were talking about, they're not. They're two very distinct positions. Yes, Sometimes there's some overlap depending on the size and scope of the organization. But when all things considered, if you look at those two roles individually, they serve different functions while both supporting the principal. So I think there's still so much, I think, misunderstanding around both roles. And I always had that challenge when I was in the EA role. Like, people didn't quite understand what that role was. I moved into a chief of staff role. The waters are still murky there too. But at the end of the day, I always try to, like, any of these team members I'm working with, or even executives too, like, I always think about, how do you want to show up? Are you operating as a leader? Are you asking great questions? Are you helping your executive formulate strong decisions? Really focusing on like the self leadership part, because regardless of what title you have, I always say, are you an employee on the team who, when your executive is going to go into battle, they want you by their side? And that can be in an EA capacity, chief of staff capacity. Yes, I think titles are important. Yes, job descriptions are super important too. But what, again, at the heart of it for me is, what's most important is, can you solve problems? Can you make strategic decisions? Can you use your discernment and judgment? And can you execute and make things happen for your executive and your organization? So I didn't completely answer your question, but sometimes I do feel like we get a little lost in the talking about the titles and the specific job description for the individual. Sometimes that's why I just say, you know what, it's the right-hand partner, it's the force multiplier, whatever form that person comes in. The goal is to make sure that that individual's agenda, their vision, is communicated, organized, and delegated throughout the organization. That's helping turn that vision into reality. That's the real goal and the real mission.
Yeah, I love that, because you're right. There's so much murkiness around like titles and what they're doing and what they're supposed to be doing and what they're not doing and all of these
Mm-hmm.
things, which is why I also love like the growing awareness on LinkedIn, here on YouTube, like all of the growing awareness around the profession. Um, there's so much space for like so many voices and so much contributing to it, because we need to get it like out there more. So what are some things you're working on right now?
Am I working on? Well, I right now, last year I launched the Force Multiplier Academy. So similar to our conversation, like, my training is very much around leadership, communication, and decision-making skills for right-hand partners to entrepreneurial leaders. So yes, they tend to be EAs, chiefs of staff, directors of operations, PAs, who work in small businesses, work with founders, and are looking to kind of level up their individual leadership skills to be a better right-hand partner. So I've launched that. And I do a little bit of fractional chief of staff work. I like to have one client just to kind of keep my foot in the door on being that right-hand partner. I also do some one-on-one coaching. And then I'm currently getting my book coach certification. And I hope to work with authors more in the future to help them turn their idea into reality, just in the form of a book rather than in a company.
Yeah, I love all of that. It's kind of funny, because I always think like as chiefs of staff, we're learning so much that can set us up to be our own, business owners, entrepreneurs, our own CEOs. There's so much, like, it lends itself so well to entrepreneurship because you've learned so much. But it's interesting that you said you still like doing the fractional chief of staff, because I totally get it. Sometimes I'm like, I miss like being part of a team and like making things happen.
Yes, I didn't realize. So I took a little bit of time off, and when I left my chief of staff role and started my own business, and I didn't think I would miss it. I think I needed a little bit of a break, but then about a year afterwards, I was like, I really miss, like, that you just like solving problems, making things happen, that just exchanging ideas and being that thought partner and a strategic advisor. Like, I really missed that. So I'm excited to be able to continue to do that in a small way.
Yeah, no, I love that so much, because it is part of the mindset. Like I always say, like, yes, there are some like chief of staff skill sets, but it's really like a mindset. And if you're that kind of person who's like, I just want to roll up my sleeves and make these things real, I always say, like, the CEO makes it up, the chief of staff makes it real. And like,
Yes.
if you have that mindset of like, I just want to, like, yes, we can totally apply this. Everything we learn, we can apply it to our own businesses. Everything we learn, we can apply to different types of roles. But there's still that, like, I just want to like go like help someone make their vision a reality. And like, I know how to do it. Like, let me come in and get the work done. So that's cool.
Yeah, I've always found that I really, and this is even translating into my work as a coach and my work, with working with authors, like, my heart, I always say I am a force multiplier first. Like, as a client goal, my goal is to take their goals and their whatever it is that they're working on and help them realize that. That's just being a great chief of staff force multiplier, right? You just do it in a different context, like for coaching. Same with, working with somebody on a book. It's that for me, again, that force multiplier mindset where I love being the person that helps the person
Yeah.
achieve what they want and what they desire.
Yes, yeah. I love when other people get that because I'm like, it's hard to explain, but like I feel successful when I've made someone else successful. Like,
Totally. Yeah. And it is funny when you talk to some entrepreneurs or CEOs of really large companies, sometimes they're like, why would anyone want that job? Why would anyone want to do that? Don't you want to be the person out front, the one with your name on the door and the face on the sign? And I'm like, no, 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 no. There's a whole group of us who not only are amazing at it, but love being that person next to the person.
yeah. Oh, I love that so much. So before we go, I would love to hear any advice that you would want to give to someone who's considering the chief of staff role. What would you tell?
Yeah, for me, it's always like it's knowledge, but it's like applied knowledge. And trying to do the work before you have the official title, volunteer for opportunities that give you some of the insights or skills into the type of work that you might be interested in. I think like my biggest advice is always work on your leadership skills. And I'll say that almost for anybody in any role, but particularly for the chief of staff is it's yes, there's tactical things. You need to be able to, put together OKRs and complex meeting agendas and be a great project manager. Those are like the tactics, but at the heart of it, if you're not able to lead yourself, lead other people, lead leadership teams, lead your executive more than anyone else, like I don't know how long you would be successful in the role if you're not really committed to making yourself the strongest leader that you can be. So for me, it's like just lean in to learning as much as you can about being an amazing leader. Yeah, that's what I would say.
Yeah, I think that's so great because you're right. Like, there can be a misconception that chief of staff is just completely support. And yes, it is behind the scenes, but it is also a leadership role. And so there
Mm-hmm.
are certain things you have to be aware of and be comfortable with in that leadership role.
Right. Making really hard decisions, being unpopular, saying the things that nobody else wants to say, firing people, making the tough calls, telling your executive what they don't want to hear, orchestrating change, all of those things that are what leaders do, but those are the challenging parts of leadership, right? And being able to really embrace that and own it, I think is important.
Yeah. Well, this has been such a great conversation, Hallie. For those of our audience members who might want to learn more about you or follow you, I can leave information in the comments, but could you share that info with us?
Sure. LinkedIn is one of the best places to connect. And then you can always go to my website, founderandforcemultiplier.com, and that'll lead you to all sorts of places that may be helpful to you.
I love that. So everyone, just so you know, anytime you see that force multiplier, this is the originator of it and the idea, and just so happy to have you with us today and looking forward to connecting with you more.
Thank you so much.